"There's a door behind the painting," the little black girl whispered. Her voice barely cut through the heavy stillness of the William Estates library, yet it struck like lightning into the silence. Jackson William glanced up from his tablet, eyebrows raised above his square-rimmed glasses. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Maya didn't answer at first. She stood on the Persian rug, head tilted toward the massive oil painting on the far wall, a grand portrait of the original William Patriarch, painted in thick, self-important strokes. Her small hand hovered inches from the canvas. She could still hear it, that faint, mechanical click she'd heard twice now. Deliberate, metallic, like a lock disengaging from the other side. Jackson waited, but she didn't move. He finally stood, tugging at the cuff of his tailored flannel shirt. "Maya?" he asked, gentler this time. "What's going on?" "There's something back there," she said, looking up at him with wide eyes. "I heard it." He followed her gaze to the wall. "That painting's been up there for over 50 years. Probably just the old house settling." Maya didn't flinch. "No, it's not the house. It's something else." He gave a short chuckle, the kind that grown-ups use when they think children are imagining things, but his eyes softened as he crouched beside her. "This house creaks and groans like an old man in winter, but I promise, there's nothing behind that painting except plaster and wood." "But it clicked, Jackson. Twice." He tousled her curls. "You've got an imagination, I'll give you that." She frowned but didn't press further. Not yet. Later that night, Maya lay awake in her room under a thick quilt. The radiator hissed. The wind scratched at the windows. But none of those sounds made her sit up like the one she heard next to click, and the soft thud of movement coming from the floor below. She tiptoed out of bed, bare feet brushing across the cold hardwood floor, and crept to her door. The hallway was dark. Only the faint golden glow of a table lamp downstairs lit the banister's edge. She moved silently, avoiding the third step that creaked, and made her way to the library door. It stood slightly ajar. Inside, the painting remained, looming above the hearth. But the air felt different, tense, watchful. She stepped closer, heart pounding in her chest. With one fingertip, she touched the canvas. Nothing. Then again click. Clearer this time. Louder. The sound didn't come from the painting, it came from behind it. The next morning during breakfast, she watched Jackson stir his coffee absent-mindedly as Edith, the silver-haired housekeeper, laid out warm cornbread and fried eggs. The smell of crisp bacon hung in the air, mixing with the sweet scent of maple syrup and something deeper tension. Edith smiled kindly at Maya as she poured her orange juice. "You sleep okay, darling?" Maya nodded slowly. "Do you know who painted the portrait in the library?" Edith's hand froze mid-pour. "Just for a second. Why do you ask?" "I heard something behind it." Edith resumed her pour. "Old houses have old secrets," she said quietly, then gave a gentle pat on Maya's shoulder. "Best not to poke at shadows you don't understand." "But what if they're trying to be seen?" Maya replied. That made Edith pause. She met Maya's gaze with eyes that had weathered many winters. "Not all truths are kind, sweetheart. Some are better left sleeping, but someone's still keeping them alive," Maya whispered. At that moment, Jackson cleared his throat from across the table. "Hey, Maya. I was thinking maybe we could check out the library later. Just the two of us. You can show me what you heard." Her face lit up. "Really?" He gave her a lopsided grin. "Really? You've convinced me to play detective for a day." And true to his word, that afternoon Jackson stood beside her in the library, staring at the painting. "It's a beautiful piece," he murmured, "though the guy looks like he never smiled a day in his life." Maya pointed. "Right there, behind it. I think there's a door." He sighed and pulled a stepladder over. "If you're right, we'll call Scooby-Doo and the gang. If you're wrong, I'm still buying you ice cream for being brave." She watched him climb, fingers crossed at her side. As Jackson reached the top, he placed both hands on the edge of the gilded frame and froze. "What?" she asked. He pressed gently, then knocked. The sound wasn't solid. It was hollow. Jackson's jaw tightened. "Well, I'll be damned." So, a minute later, with some maneuvering and a soft metallic clack, the painting slid off a hidden rail and leaned forward. Behind it was not just drywall, but a panel of aged oak. In the center, a brass knob tarnished with age. The wood around it showed recent wear. Someone had been using it. Maya looked up at him, heart thudding. "You see?" Jackson didn't speak right away. He stepped back, stunned. This wasn't in the blueprints. I knew it, she said. He glanced down at her, eyes suddenly filled with something she hadn't seen before. Concern. Real concern. I don't know what this is, he murmured, but I don't like surprises. She watched him struggle with the knob. It didn't budge. Locked? He nodded. Edith appeared in the doorway then, holding a feather duster and a tray of tea. Her eyes landed on the open space behind the painting and the door. She nearly dropped the tray. I told you, Maya said softly. There's a door. Edith's lips parted. You shouldn't have found that. Jackson frowned. You knew? Edith nodded, trembling. I hoped it would stay buried. But why hide a door? Jackson asked. Edith lowered her eyes. Because sometimes what's behind the door doesn't want to stay locked forever. Outside, the wind rustled the leafless trees. Inside, the William estate took a breath. And somewhere deep behind that wooden door, something old remembered it was not yet done. Where were you? When the girl whispered, There's a door behind the painting? Tell us in the comments, are you watching this alone? Or did someone else feel the chill too? And if that moment sent a shiver down your spine, tap, like, so we know you heard it too. The next morning, Maya was up before the sun. She had barely slept. The door behind the painting haunted her dreams, always slightly ajar but never open, always whispering but never speaking. She sat curled in the window seat of her room, staring down at the frost-glazed lawn of the William estate. The branches of the ancient oaks trembled in the wind like nervous fingers. She didn't know what was behind that door, but she knew it had been waiting a long time for someone like her. By the time she came down to the kitchen, Edith was already preparing breakfast. The familiar scent of butter and grits filled the air. The old woman moved slowly this morning, as if weighed down by something deeper than her years. Morning, sugar, Edith said gently, not turning around. Maya slid into her usual seat at the old farmhouse table, silent for a moment before she spoke. You knew it was there. Edith didn't respond right away. She poured hot water into a chipped teapot, then finally looked at Maya with tired eyes. I've served this house for nearly 4 decades. I've known about that door since the day I first walked through the front gates. Why didn't you tell anyone? Edith hesitated. Because some things are too heavy for truth alone to carry. Maya frowned. That doesn't make sense. No, baby, it doesn't. But that's how old secrets work. They rot in silence and shame, and after a while no one even remembers where the truth ends and the lie begins. Before Maya could answer, Jackson entered the kitchen, fully dressed, tie already knotted, coffee in hand. Morning, ladies, he said, pressing a kiss to Maya's forehead. She didn't smile. She just looked up at him. Did you sleep? Barely, he admitted. Spent half the night searching the house plans. That door? It's not in any document I can find. Maya glanced at Edith. The older woman didn't meet her eyes. Jackson sat down and sipped his coffee. I've called the contractor who did the last major renovation in 2002. He says he never saw any sign of a door behind that wall. Because it was never meant to be found, Edith said softly. Maya turned to Jackson. We have to open it. He blinked at her. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Why? Are you scared? He gave a soft laugh. Scared? Number cautious? Yes. There could be anything behind that door. Structural instability, mold, electrical wiring. It's not just a mystery, Maya. It's a liability. Maya leaned forward. But what if it's not? What if it's something important, something someone wanted to stay hidden? Jackson looked at Edith again, then sighed. I'll have Samir take a look. Who's Samir? Maya asked. My tech guy. He's upgrading the estate's security system. Used to work cybersecurity for the Department of Defense. He's thorough. Maya nodded slowly. Okay, but I want to be there when you open it. Jackson gave her a look. We'll see. By mid-morning, Samir arrived. He was a wiry man in his late 20s with warm brown skin, square glasses, and an easy smile. He carried 2 duffel bags of gear and a laptop strapped to his back. Maya followed him closely as Jackson led him into the library. Whoa, Samir said, looking up at the massive oil painting, now propped against the far wall. This room is something else. Jackson pointed. That's the panel. It was hidden behind the painting. We haven't touched the door since last night. Samir knelt beside it and ran his fingers along the brass knob. He pulled out a small black device, like a tablet, and started scanning the surface. No dust, he murmured. Lock's been touched recently. Look, scratch marks around the keyhole. Maya's heart skipped. So someone's been opening it? Samir nodded. Or at least trying. This isn't just old hardware. It's been maintained. Jackson crossed his arms. You think someone else has been using it? Samir gave him a look. You said this house was unoccupied for nearly 5 years before you moved in, right? Jackson nodded. Well, someone's been down here since then. Maybe more than once. They spent the next hour inspecting the surrounding area. Samir brought out a fiber optic camera and inserted it through a slim gap in the paneling near the lock. There's a narrow passage, he said. Stairs, maybe? Looks like stone. There's also… Wait, that's odd. What? Jackson asked. Wiring, Samir said. Modern. Someone ran a power line down there. Jackson's face hardened. Are you telling me there's a powered space behind this wall and I didn't know about it? I'm telling you someone else knew. That afternoon, Jackson decided to call in a structural engineer to ensure the stairs were safe to explore. Maya watched from the kitchen table, chewing on the edge of her pencil as Jackson made arrangements. Her gut twisted. She didn't want professionals or drills or scanners. She wanted answers. Later that night, Maya wandered back to the library. The room was dark except for the glow from the fireplace. She sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the sealed door. The brass handle gleamed faintly in the firelight. What are you? She whispered. Footsteps behind her made her jump. Edith stood in the doorway, holding a folded blanket. You shouldn't be in here alone. I couldn't sleep. Edith came in, sat beside her, and draped the blanket across her shoulders. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling behind them. Did you ever open it? Maya asked. No, Edith replied. I was warned not to. By who? Edith didn't answer right away. Your grandfather. When I first started working here, he said the William family had rooms they'd rather no one remembered. Why? Because they were built for things no one wanted to see. Maya turned toward her. Do you believe that? Edith looked at her. I believe a house this old carries the weight of everything done inside it, good or bad. I believe some rooms remember more than people do. Maya thought about that as she stared at the door. She wasn't scared, not really, not of the room, but she was scared of what it might mean, of what it might change. She wasn't just a girl in a big house anymore. She was a girl who had heard something no one else did, and now she was the only one who couldn't unhear it. The next morning, Jackson was on the phone with the County Historical Society, arguing over whether the estate had any hidden architectural features on public record. Maya, meanwhile, found herself wandering the east wing, following an instinct more than a plan. She checked every window latch, every creaking board. Something didn't sit right. She stopped in front of a closed guest room door. Bianca Laramithi Estate's new design consultant had left her coat here the day before. Maya reached for the knob. It wasn't locked. She stepped inside. The room was dark, heavy with lavender scent and the faint hint of perfume. A tablet sat on the writing desk, still glowing. Maya glanced toward the hallway, then walked over. The screen displayed a 3D render of the house's layout, but not the current layout. This one was older, a digital reconstruction of the estate's original architecture, and on the far right corner, labeled faintly in gray, storage sub, level, access via library. Maya's breath caught. She looked again. The hidden door was marked, and it was named Vault. She backed away, heart racing. Bianca knew. She knew the door existed and she had plans. Maya didn't touch anything else. She tiptoed back out and quietly shut the door behind her. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, mind spinning. Bianca wasn't just redesigning rooms. She was investigating the house from the inside out. And Maya was certain now someone had opened that door before her. Someone who didn't want it locked again. But she also knew one more thing. She wasn't imagining anything. She was finally seeing what no one else dared to look at. And tomorrow, no matter what anyone said, she was going to open that door. Maya stood in front of the door again the next morning. This time, she wasn't alone. Jackson stood beside her with his arms crossed, wearing a navy sweater over his dress shirt, and a look that was equal parts curiosity and dread. Samir crouched beside the panel with his tools laid out across a nearby chair. Edith hovered near the fireplace, her hands nervously wringing a dish towel she refused to put down. "You're sure about this?" Jackson asked, his voice low. "No," Samir replied, adjusting his glasses. "But if we don't check, someone else will. Someone less cautious." Maya didn't say a word. She kept her eyes fixed on the door. The brass knob looked dull in the morning light, but something about it still shimmered as if it were waiting to be turned. Samir inserted a small key-like device into the lock, turned it gently, then twisted a knob on his handheld scanner. The lock clicked open like a sigh. "There," he said. "No alarms, no booby traps at least none I can detect. But I'd still suggest we don't go rushing in." Jackson exhaled slowly. "Then let's not waste time." They pulled the door open. It creaked on old oiled hinges that protested but did not break. A cold breath of air escaped the darkness behind it, like something exhaling after a long sleep. Maya stepped forward instinctively. "Wait," Jackson said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Let me go first." She nodded, and he picked up a powerful flashlight. The beam sliced into the dark, revealing narrow stone steps curving downward. Jackson stepped in cautiously. Maya followed close behind, her fingers grazing the cool stone walls. Samir brought up the rear, scanning with a handheld device that beeped occasionally. They descended 10 steps, 20, 30. At the bottom was a small stone chamber, perhaps 20 feet across. The ceiling arched low, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth and something else, something old and metallic. In the center of the room sat a large wooden chest with iron bands, its lock mechanism intricate and rusting but clearly maintained. Around it were wooden crates, tattered canvas bags, and what looked like piles of discolored cloth. Maya's eyes landed on something dark smeared across the floor-long dried stains that formed chaotic arcs and streaks. She moved closer. "Is that blood?" Samir crouched and examined the markings. "Old. Very old. But yeah, probably." Jackson stood over the chest, flashlight fixed on the lock. "Look at this. Scratches around the keyhole, and it's warm to the touch. Someone's tampered with this recently." "That's not all," Maya said. She knelt near one of the canvas bags and gently pulled it open. Inside were yellowed papers, some crumbling, others intact letters, ledgers, a crumpled photograph. Jackson took the photograph. It showed a younger version of the William patriarch, standing in front of the estate, arm around another man whose face had been scratched out violently. Edith stepped forward slowly, mouth slightly open. "That's Thomas Maddox," she whispered. "The man who built the East Wing, my great-uncle." Jackson looked up. "You said your family worked here for generations, but you never mentioned this." Edith's eyes filled with tears. "Because we were written out. After Thomas disappeared, the William family told everyone he ran off, but my grandmother never believed it. She said he'd found some truth, that cost him everything." Jackson rubbed his forehead. "So what is this room? A burial? A vault?" Samir moved around the space. "More like a forgotten archive. But it's been disturbed. Someone's already gone through these documents." Maya pointed to the chest. "We need to open that." Jackson hesitated. "This could be a crime scene, Maya. A real one." She looked at him, voice steady. "So why are we acting like it's still a secret?" He met her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Samir examined the chest's lock. "It's old, but it's been cleaned. There's a secondary mechanism here. Could be a trap, or just extra security. Can you open it?" "I can try." It took 20 minutes. Jackson and Maya stood to the side while Samir worked, his brow furrowed, fingers nimble. Finally, with a heavy clunk, the lock gave way. He slowly lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of documents bound in red ribbon. On top was a thick envelope marked Confidential 1923 MAD. There was also something heavier beneath the papers, a small iron box with a seal etched in Latin. Jackson opened the envelope. His face went pale as he read the first page. Maya watched him. "What is it?" He handed it to her. It was a confession, written in a trembling hand. It detailed how Thomas Maddox had discovered financial records showing the William family had manipulated land deeds, stealing the estate from the original Bildershees family. When Thomas confronted the patriarch, there was a struggle. The letter implied that Thomas had fallen, maybe pushed and died. The final lines were the most chilling. "We buried him where the house could forget, but I never did. And I pray one day, Someone will make it right. Maya looked at Jackson. This is your family's secret. He said nothing. Edith stepped forward and took the letter from Maya's hands. She read it slowly, then sat down on an overturned crate. Her voice cracked. I knew it. All these years, my grandmother was right. Samir closed the chest. This isn't just scandalous, it's criminal. We need to take this to the authorities. Jackson nodded. Agreed, but we need to move carefully. The William name carries a lot of weight. If this gets out too fast, someone might try to bury it again, Maya finished. Just then, footsteps echoed from above. They all froze. Jackson turned off the flashlight. Stay quiet. The sound of heels clicked against stone tile. Then a woman's voice, cold and precise. I'm in. The child found it, but she doesn't understand what it's worth yet. I just need the combination. Maya's eyes widened. Bianca, Edith whispered. She's been in and out of this house for weeks. I knew she asked too many questions. Jackson signaled to Samir and Maya. Back upstairs, now. They climbed quickly, silently, Maya's heart pounding in her chest. When they reached the top, Jackson quietly shut the hidden door and repositioned the painting. Just in time. Bianca stepped into the library, phone still pressed to her ear. She stopped when she saw them. Her face froze, then shifted into a smile. Oh, I didn't know anyone was in here. Jackson crossed his arms. Looking for something? She laughed lightly. Just checking light fixtures for the redesign. Maya stepped forward. You lied. Bianca's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You told someone you were in, that I found something, that you needed the combination. I heard you. Jackson's voice turned hard. You're bugging the house? Bianca's expression cracked for a split second. I think we're all getting carried away. Samir pulled out his scanner and activated it. Within seconds, it pinged. Found it. Hidden transmitter in your coat. Bianca's mask crumbled. Jackson stepped forward. Leave. Now. Before I call the sheriff. She straightened, regaining some of her composure. You don't understand what's at stake here. Maya's voice was quiet but sharp. Number, you don't. This isn't just about money. It's about what's right. Bianca stared at her, then turned and walked out without another word. Silence returned. Jackson sat down heavily on the arm of a leather chair. What do we do now? Edith gently rested a hand on his shoulder. We tell the truth. That's what families should have done from the start. Maya stepped forward. Then let's start by calling the police. For the first time since he'd opened the door, Jackson looked relieved. I'll make the call. Maya looked back at the portrait of the William patriarch. His painted eyes still stared ahead, cold and unmoved. But now, it felt like someone was finally looking back. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing. She had opened the door, and the truth wasn't going back in. The sheriff arrived just after dawn, his cruiser kicking up gravel as it pulled into the wide stone circle of the William estate driveway. The sun had barely crested the distant hills, casting a pale gold glow over the treetops and turning the mansion's old windows into muted mirrors. Jackson met him outside, standing on the porch with a thermos of coffee and eyes that hadn't slept. Sheriff Curtis Hill, a man in his 60s with a silver mustache and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen too much, stepped out and adjusted his belt. Jackson, he said with a nod. Curtis, Jackson replied. Thanks for coming. The sheriff looked up at the old house. Heard you had a break-in. Something like that. Inside. Maya sat curled up on the library couch, clutching a cup of hot cocoa Edith had made for her. Samir paced quietly near the painting, now slid aside to reveal the still-open secret door. Edith stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, watchful. Curtis stepped into the room, removed his hat, and looked at the scene. His eyes lingered on Maya, then shifted to the door in the wall. Can someone explain what I'm looking at? Jackson motioned to the stairway. It leads to a hidden room under the estate. We found it 2 days ago, after Maya heard a mechanical noise. There's a locked chest, documents, and what appears to be a confession from my great-grandfather. Curtis arched a brow. Confession to what? Land theft, possibly murder. That made the room go still. Even Samir stopped pacing. Curtis turned to Maya. And you found it? She nodded. I heard the gears clicking behind the painting. I kept hearing them. Curtis rubbed his jaw. I'll need to see the documents. Jackson handed him the envelope. Curtis flipped through it slowly. As his eyes moved across the yellowed pages, his expression darkened. When he finished, he exhaled hard and handed it back. "Where's the chest?" "Still downstairs," Samir said. "I can show you." "No need yet," Curtis said. "I'll get a deputy out here with evidence bags and a camera crew. You'll need to hand everything over." Maya sat up straighter. "Will there be an investigation?" Curtis looked at her. "There will be a review. But this is a private estate, Maya, and these documents are nearly 100 years old." "So that means what? Nothing happens?" she asked, her voice trembling but steady. Curtis's tone turned softer. "It means this falls into complicated territory. If there was a murder, the suspect's been dead for decades. And the statute of limitations on land fraud doesn't mean it shouldn't be acknowledged." Jackson cut in. "People were hurt. An entire family erased from the history of this house." Curtis looked at him long and hard. "You're the William heir, Jackson. You're sitting on a legacy that built half this county. You really want to stir this pot?" "I didn't stir it," Jackson said coldly. "It was already boiling. We just lifted the lid." Curtis sighed and put his hat back on. "I'll do what I can, but don't expect the DA to prioritize something this old." He turned and left, leaving behind more silence than he took with him. After the door shut, Samir muttered, "He's going to bury it." Edith didn't say anything. She sat down, rubbing her hands as if trying to warm them from a deeper cold. Maya walked to the window and looked out toward the tree line. "So what now?" Jackson stood near the hearth, staring into the fading embers. "We don't wait." You're not going to let the police handle it?" "They won't. Not fully. Not here." Maya turned. "Then we do it ourselves? We tell the story. All of it." That night, Jackson invited a small group of trusted people to the estate: a local historian, a retired reporter from the Marion Gazette, and a community elder from the old black church near the edge of town. They gathered in the parlor, sipping coffee and listening as Jackson, Maya, and Edith laid out everything step by step. At first, the room felt cautious, tense, but as the letters were passed around and the name Maddox was spoken aloud, something shifted. The elder, Mrs. Lottie Brooks, held the photograph of Thomas Maddox with trembling fingers. "My father told me stories about a man who vanished after building part of this house. Said he was cheated and then disappeared. Folks always wondered." The retired reporter, Richard Keller, examined the confession. This is a story that matters, but it'll be hard to publish without official backing. That's why we need the community," Maya said. "People like you. People who remember. People who care." Lottie leaned forward. "Child, I've been waiting 50 years for someone in that house to speak the truth. You may just be the one we needed." Richard nodded. "We publish this in the Gazette's digital section. Forget the old channels. Let the people see it first. No gatekeepers." Jackson added, "We'll back it up with a video. We'll show the room, the documents, the photo. We'll narrate the story start to finish." Richard looked at him. "And you're ready to put the William name on it?" Jackson met his gaze. "It's already on the crime. Time it stood on the truth." And so, over the course of a week, the estate became a quiet production set. Samir helped digitize the documents. Edith provided oral history that had never been recorded. Maya, with Jackson's help, scripted the story firm, honest, emotional. On the 7th night, they released the video. It opened with Maya, sitting in the library. Her voice was soft but steady. "My name is Maya William. I am 9 years old, and I found a door behind a painting that changed everything." The footage cut to Jackson, who gave a short history of the estate, then to the hidden chamber. Close-ups of the confession, the photograph, the lock on the chestal of it presented with solemn, quiet clarity. Then Edith appeared. "My family served this house for 4 generations. We were promised dignity. What we got was silence. This is our story, too." The video ended with the camera resting on the painting of the William patriarch. A slow zoom in on his eyes, then fade to black. The response was immediate. Comments flooded in. Shares exploded across local feeds. The Gazette's site crashed under the traffic. People were angry. People were grieving. But mostly they were awake. 3 days later, the mayor issued a statement. The County Historical Society requested access to the William Estate archives, and a small but determined group of residents formed a community council to investigate suppressed histories across the region. Curtis called Jackson. I saw the video, he said, voice tight. I'm sure you did. You should have come to me first. I did, Jackson replied. You walked out. There was silence on the line. Then, be careful. Not everyone wants these old ghosts disturbed. Then they shouldn't have buried them in my walls, Jackson said and hung up. That night, Maya sat on the porch with Edith, watching fireflies drift over the lawn. You did something powerful, Edith said. Maya looked down. I just heard the door. Yes, Edith said, placing a hand on her shoulder. But you opened it. Inside, Jackson stood by the portrait of his ancestor. He looked at the man's painted face and whispered, "This house belongs to truth now." And for the first time in decades, the mansion felt less like a tom band, more like a home. By the end of the week, the video had amassed over 2 million views. What began as a family revelation had become something larger and awakening. People from all over the state, and even beyond, began reaching out. Descendants of laborers, historians, amateur archivists, and teachers. Some came to learn, others came to remember. But one message stood out. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope, hand-delivered to the gate by a man in a faded army jacket. The handwriting on the front was elegant, precise. To Maya William and Jackson William, regarding Thomas Maddox. Maya held the letter in both hands, then looked up at Jackson. Do you think it's from his family? Jackson took the envelope gently. Only one way to find out. Inside was a folded piece of parchment paper. The message was short, written in fountain pen ink. My name is Clara Maddox. I am the granddaughter of Thomas Maddox. I have watched the video. I have something to return to the William estate, something that was never yours to begin with. I will arrive Friday at noon. C.M. They read it again, and again, until the air felt heavier. Edith sat down on the edge of the couch, her lips pressing into a line. I never thought I'd live to see that name come back through the front door. Samir looked at Jackson. Are you ready for this? Jackson exhaled. I don't know, but it's not about being ready. It's about being honest. Friday came fast. The day was bright, the kind of crisp morning only September could bring. Clear skies, golden light threading through the pines that lined the long driveway. Jackson wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks. Maya insisted on a navy dress and her Sunday shoes. Edith polished the brass doorknobs herself, muttering, if we're receiving history, we might as well greet it with grace. At exactly noon, an old green Buick rolled up the gravel. A woman stepped out. She was tall, black, in her early 70s, with snow-white hair pulled back into a bun. Her dress was plum-colored, and she wore a gold brooch in the shape of an oak tree. There was no hesitation in her step as she approached the porch. Jackson opened the door himself. Mrs. Maddox? Clara, she said, offering her hand. Let's not pretend our families are strangers. He shook her hand. Then, welcome back. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Maya stood quietly by the parlor arch, her fingers twisted together. Clara noticed her first. You must be the one who heard the gears. Maya nodded. Yes, Mom. Clara stepped closer and knelt slightly. Thomas Maddox was my grandfather. He was a builder, a father, and a man of faith. But more than that, he was a man of honor. What you uncovered, you brought his name back. You gave him voice again. Maya's eyes brimmed with emotion. Clara stood tall and looked at Jackson. May I? He led her into the library. She paused before the painting of William the Elder, whose stern expression stared out like judgment carved in oil. Then her gaze slid to the hidden door. I knew something was in this house, she said quietly. My father used to say, our truths buried under their stone. He wasn't wrong. They descended into the hidden room together. Jackson lit the lanterns along the wall. The chest sat exactly where they left, it locked and unmoved. Clara walked to it and placed a small wooden box on top. This, she said, opening it, belonged to Thomas. It was returned to our family by a man who once worked for the estate. He didn't speak much, but he said Thomas had written things, down notes, records, sketches. He thought they might one day be important. Inside were neatly stacked journals. Jackson picked one up and turned the pages carefully. Hand-drawn diagrams of the estate, notes on supply orders, personal entries short, direct, powerful. The house expands again. Mr. William insists on marble from Charleston. I said it would delay the work. He told me delays were a luxury for white men. Esther is worried. Says Mr. William watches me too close. I try not to stay after sundown. I saw something in the study. A gun, laid out beside a ledger. I think he knows I know. Jackson's hands trembled slightly. This changes everything. Clara nodded. It makes it real. And now it's yours to carry. Back upstairs, the group sat around the long dining table. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, and time seemed to slow. Edith poured sweet tea. Maya passed Clara a plate of lemon squares, and for a moment, it felt less like reckoning and more like communion. Clara spoke first. I don't want revenge. I don't want money. I want my grandfather's name placed where it always should have been in the foundation of this house. Jackson nodded. We'll do it properly. A plaque, a public recognition, and something permanent, a scholarship in his name for students from this county who want to study architecture. Clara smiled, a tired kind of smile, but full of dignity. Then let this house begin again. That night, Jackson stood alone in the library. He stared at the spot where the portrait once hung. It had been taken down and stored away. In its place now was a blank wall waiting. He picked up one of Thomas's journals, turned to the last page, and read, "They may take the house, but if the truth ever finds light, maybe, just maybe, they'll hear me." He closed the journal and whispered, "We hear you." Then he walked to Maya's room. She was curled up reading, her lamp casting a warm circle over the bed. "You awake?" he asked softly. She looked up. "Yeah. I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For hearing the sound behind the painting. For not ignoring it." Maya shrugged. "It wouldn't stop. Sometimes the truth doesn't," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Sometimes it just waits for someone brave enough to listen." She leaned against him, her voice sleepy. "Does that make me brave?" He kissed her forehead. "It makes you part of something bigger." Outside, the estate was quiet, but in the town below, Clara Maddox's name had started to spread, and for the first time in generations, the William house was no longer a place of secrets but of voices, of history, of justice whispering through old walls, waiting to be answered. 3 weeks passed, and the house changed. The hidden chamber beneath the portrait had been catalogued by historians from the State University. With Jackson's permission, several preservationists came in, quiet people with soft hands and sharper eyes, documenting every nail, every torn ledger, every faded journal from Thomas Maddox's box. Nothing left that room unless it was digitally scanned and logged. Jackson was firm on that. "No more stolen names," he told them. "Not from this house." But while the scholars came and went, something else stirred inside the estate, something heavier than wood and stone. It started with the walls. Maya was the first to hear it again. Late one night, as a storm rolled in from the west and thunder grumbled low across the horizon, she stood in the second-floor hallway, barefoot in her pajamas. The rest of the house slept, but she couldn't. Not with that sound, that faint, mechanical click, click, click coming again. This time, not from behind the portrait, but from the opposite end of the corridor, behind the linen closet. She stood there, listening. She held her breath. 3 seconds. 4. Then click. "Maya?" It was Jackson's voice, groggy from sleep. She turned. "I heard it again." He rubbed his eyes and stepped beside her. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "It's not the same wall, though. This one." She pointed to the closet. Jackson looked at the old white door, its brass knob dull from time. He opened it slowly. Just towels, shelves, nothing more. Maya frowned. "No, it's behind that, just like the last time." Jackson ran his palm along the back panel of the closet. It was solid, but he felt an unevenness, a slight seam where there shouldn't be one. He glanced at her, his heartbeat rising. "Get me the flashlight." Minutes later, Edith and Samir were both awake, crowding into the narrow hallway. Jackson had pried away the top panel of the closet wall. What lay behind it wasn't a passage. It was a compartment. Inside, a rusted tin box, sealed with a small leather strap. Edith gasped. "Good God, that's from the war era." They carried the box downstairs to the dining table. Jackson peeled it open carefully, like it might bite. Inside, letters, dozens, all addressed to Mr. James William, the son of the original patriarch. Maya leaned closer. Who's James? Edith whispered. The heir, the one who never took over. He left for war in 1944 and never came back. They said he died at sea. Jackson picked up the top letter and read the return address. His face went pale. Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Samir narrowed his eyes. That's a U.S. Army hospital. That's where they sent soldiers when they couldn't send them home. They opened the first letter. The 12th of October, 1945. Dear Father, I am alive. I know this is not what you expected, but I could not return to a house that turned men like Thomas Maddox into ghosts. I have married. Her name is Lydia. She is kind, brilliant, and yes, she is black. I know what this means to you. I know the weight of the family name, but I won't pass that weight on to our children. I will not. Do with this letter what you will. But I have found peace outside these walls. Jackson looked at Maya. She blinked in disbelief. He married a black woman and left everything behind? Edith clutched the letter. That would explain why no one ever mentioned him after the war. He was erased. More letters followed, each one a plea, a protest, a confession. James wrote of his guilt over what had been done to Thomas, of the estate's silence, of his desire to rebuild something different, away from William bloodlines. And then the last letter, the 2nd of January, 1950. My children will never walk the halls of your house, Father, but they may pass by it one day. And if they do, I hope someone inside has the courage to speak truth without shame. My legacy is not in your name, it's in the lives I've tried to heal. Jackson dropped the letter and stood in silence. His lips parted, but no words came. Maya spoke first. What if there's more family out there? Samir nodded slowly. If James had children, they could still be alive, living under a different name. Maybe they never even knew the truth. Edith's eyes were wide. This estate, it's a cathedral of secrets. The next morning, Jackson made a call to a private genealogy firm. Within days, a team arrived to begin building out the William family tree from James's branch. DNA kits were dispatched, church records scoured, ship manifests reviewed. Piece by piece, a new history began to take form. Then came the name. Elias Matthews, the lead researcher said, holding up a photo. Born in 1972, grandson of James William, lives in Chicago, owns a contracting business, served in the Marines. Jackson stared at the Imagine older black man with gray temples, standing in front of a red brick community center. There was something in the eyes, familiar, quiet, steady. He has no idea who he is, does he? Jackson asked. The researcher shook her head. We don't think so. We believe his mother James's daughter changed her surname after a break with the family. She died in the early 2000s. Jackson closed the folder. Then it's time he knew. They drafted a letter. Not an invitation. A truth. Dear Mr. Matthews, we believe you may be the direct descendant of James William, son of the William family of Savannah, Georgia. We have recovered documents and letters confirming a long-buried history, one that directly concerns your grandfather and ours. This is not a demand. It is a door. We hope you choose to walk through it. You will be welcomed with dignity and respect. 2 weeks later, a reply came not in paper, but in footsteps. Elias Matthews stood at the estate gate, suitcase in hand. Maya was the first to greet him. You came, she said softly. Elias gave a half smile. It felt like the kind of door you don't close. They gathered in the library. Elias looked around, his eyes scanning the shelves, the ceiling beams, the old rug underfoot. He nodded once. I've built places like this, he said, but never walked through one knowing it had my blood in the wood. Jackson stepped forward. You don't owe us anything, but we owe you the truth. They told him everything. Thomas Maddox, the hidden room, James's letters, the scholarship fund, Clara's visit, Maya's voice. When they were done, Elias sat in silence for a long time. Then he said, It matters that you called me, but it matters more that you listened to a girl who heard a noise behind a wall. He looked at Maya. Thank you for listening. She beamed. That night, Elias stayed in the guest room on the 2nd floor. Jackson walked past the door later, hearing the soft creak of floorboards and the hush of footsteps tracing old paths. He paused. From inside the room, Elias's voice. My grandfather left you behind, but tonight, I carry you forward. Jackson blinked back the tears. Outside, the night air was warm, crickets hummed, and somewhere in the quiet bones of the house, a hidden gear clicked once then stopped, like an old truth finally coming to rest. The next morning dawned with a golden stillness. Dew glistened on the front lawn of the William estate like fine dust from a forgotten age. Inside, the house stirred awake not with noise, but with presence. Elias Matthews, now known to all as the rightful grandson of James William, stood in the breakfast room, a fresh pot of coffee steaming in front of him, but untouched. He wasn't here for luxury. He was here to listen. Across from him sat Jackson William, a man slowly unlearning the weight of pride. His eyes were drawn to the creases on Elias's hands that had built homes and cradled children and, more recently, opened the letter that changed everything. I've been thinking, Elias said quietly, about all the things my grandfather wanted to say, but didn't. Letters left unsent, questions unanswered. Jackson folded his hands together. I think it's time we find those voices. Later that day, with Maya once again leading them, this time armed with a flashlight and a sense of mission, they ventured deeper into the house. Not just the visible rooms, but the forgotten ones. The basement pantry sealed off after a flood decades ago, the attic storage under dusty drop cloths, even the crawl space behind the old study. It was in that study, behind the boarded-up fireplace, that they discovered a narrow cavity. Jackson pried the loose bricks free, and what tumbled out was not treasure but memory. A metal filing box, aged and rattling. Inside it, more letters. But these were not James's. These were from Lydia. They were dated between 1946 and 1949, each one addressed to her husband, James William. Each one returned, unopened. The first was stained with tears. The 17th of January, 1946. My love, I don't know if you are receiving these, but I have to believe you are alive somewhere, thinking of me, as I think of you every second. Our daughter, Ella, has your eyes, wide and calm, like the sea. She hums when she sleeps, something you used to do when you were deep in thought. I tell her stories about you. I tell her you are brave and kind and that you chose peace over silence. Please come back to us, or send word, anything. Maya pressed the letter to her chest. They never saw each other again? Edith shook her head. She must have sent them after he left the South, and someone in this house made sure James never saw them. Jackson's jaw tightened. Probably my grandfather. He controlled the mail. Letter after letter poured out. In one, Lydia spoke of moving north to avoid suspicion. In another, she described Ella's first steps, her first word, star. Then came the final letter. The 24th of December, 1949. James, this will be my last letter. Not because I love you any less, but because hope has become too heavy to carry alone. I will raise Ella to be strong, to never fear the truth. And if she ever finds this house, I pray someone inside will finally open a door. For you, for us, for her. Elias stood frozen. My mother, she never told me. She may have never known about these letters, Jackson said, voice low. They were hidden, buried. Samir, quiet until now, finally spoke. These aren't just letters, they're testimonies. And they were silenced. Jackson nodded slowly. Then we give them voice. That night, Jackson sat alone at his study desk. In front of him lay one of Lydia's letters. He placed a voice recorder beside it and began to read, softly but clearly. His voice wavered at first, but steadied. Then he read the next, and the next. Over the next week, the estate transformed into something else, part archive, part reckoning. Maya organized the letters with Edith, carefully laminating and labeling them. Elias contributed old photos from his attic in Chicago. Together, they began to construct the missing tree of the William family. Not the one printed in gilt-edged books, but the living one, the true one. And when the local newspaper caught wind of the story, everything changed. The article ran under the headline, Forgotten Bloodlines, A Southern Family Faces Its Past. It detailed the discovery of Thomas Maddox's hidden chamber, James's defiant letters, and the reunion with Elias Matthews. But what caught the most attention was Maya. The reporter had spoken to her gently, not expecting much from a child. But Maya's words, simple and solemn, became the story's closing paragraph. I heard something behind the wall, and I thought, if someone's voice is stuck there, maybe we should listen. The next day, the estate phone rang nonstop. People, strangers from across the country, offered support, shared stories of their own buried legacies. A teacher from Michigan donated copies of her students' essays on forgotten Black veterans. A retired lawyer from New Orleans offered pro bono help to preserve and publish the William Matthews letters. And then a voice from the past called. Her name was Evelyn Maddox. She was Thomas Maddox's great-granddaughter. I read the article, she said, her voice shaky. My grandfather never spoke of his father, only that he died working for a man who never looked him in the eye. But now I know who he meant. Jackson invited her to visit. Evelyn arrived a week later. She was in her 60s, tall and graceful, with piercing brown eyes and a steady gait. When she stepped into the chamber beneath the portrait, her hands trembled. He died in this house, she whispered, running her fingers across the wooden cot, the faded photograph of Thomas's wife. And none of us ever knew. Jackson stood beside her. We're not asking for forgiveness. We're asking to make it right. She turned to him. Then tell his story. Loud, clear, and don't put your name first. Evelyn stayed for dinner that evening. The table was long. The plates mismatched, some modern, some old family china, but everyone found a place. Maya sat beside Elias. Edith offered sweet tea. Samir carved the roast. Evelyn brought a bottle of wine from her own collection. They didn't talk about history. They made new history. After dinner, Maya asked Elias, "Are you going to stay?" Elias looked around the table, then out the window at the estate he never expected to find. "I think I've been staying for 70 years. I just didn't know where." He turned to Jackson. "What do you want to do with all this?" Jackson didn't hesitate. "Build something, a foundation. Scholarships for descendants of every servant, every worker who was silenced. Rename the library after Thomas Maddox. And the estate, it'll be opened to the public. A museum of what wasn't, what should have been." Elias nodded. "Then I'll help." That night, in the quiet of the estate, Maya sat by the fire and traced her finger across an old photograph of James and Lydia. She looked up at the ceiling, as if it might whisper back. "Thank you," she said softly. And in the old wood above her, a breeze moved not with secrets this time, but with peace. The morning sun spilled gently through the lace curtains in the guest room where Elias now stayed. His hands, calloused and strong from decades of carpentry and community work, ran across the smooth edges of an old picture frame he'd found the night before. Inside it, a faded photograph of Lydia holding a baby girl, standing on a dusty road with an old wooden fence behind her. He recognized the backdrop. It wasn't far from where his childhood home once stood before the city turned it into a parking lot. That photo wasn't just history. It was memory, solidified. Downstairs, Maya waited in the drawing room with Edith, her fingers flipping nervously through a scrapbook they'd started. "Do you think people will believe it all?" Maya asked, her voice soft but steady. "They don't need to believe it," Edith replied gently. "They just need to listen. You already did the hard part, honey. You heard the voices nobody else could." Meanwhile, Jackson Williams stood in the center of the grand hallway, facing the portrait of his great-grandfather again. Only this time, it was no longer the intimidating guardian of a proud bloodline, was a lie, staring back at him. Behind that oil-painted stare, they had found a prison, a love buried, a truth gagged. The house no longer felt like his, but maybe that was the point. He turned as Evelyn Maddox entered from the rear hall, carrying a yellowed folder she had brought from her own family's archive. She walked with a cane now, but her spine was straight. "I found something," she said, "that might explain more about Thomas." Inside the folder were payroll ledgers, photographs, and a typed document marked confidential from 1933. Jackson scanned the top. "William Estate, Construction Department, Labor Assignment Notes." He read aloud. "Worker 78B, Maddox, Thomas, assigned to sub-foundation work due to political threat seen as agitating for equal pay. Recommendation: isolate, remove from rotation." Elias's jaw tightened. They buried him in the walls long before he died. Samir stood silently in the corner, taking notes. "This isn't just one family's secret," he said. "It's a pattern. Suppression woven into brick and wood." By noon, the house was filled with boxes, documents, half-assembled displays, and a growing sense of urgency. Jackson had made a decision. They would open the estate not just as a museum, but as a center for truth-telling, a place where the unspoken stories of marginalized voices could breathe. It would be called the Maddox Williams Center for Historical Justice. "We need more than rooms and plaques," Elias said as they walked through the old gallery hall. "We need a wall of names." Jackson paused. "Names?" "Yeah," Elias said. "For every servant, every silenced worker, every mother who wrote a letter that never got sent, every voice that never got put on paper. Even if all we know is the pain they left behind, we honor that." And that's how the Wall of Witnesses was born. Edith began scouring old staff records. Evelyn contacted families in Alabama and Georgia, whose grandparents had once worked for the William estate. Samir created a submission portal online, and Maya wrote the opening inscription. "To those who were buried behind walls, under titles, between lines of ledgers, and under the weight of silence, we hear you now." As the project progressed, something remarkable began to happen. People started showing up. Quietly at first, a woman in her 80s who held a faded apron her grandmother once wore while cleaning the estate. A young black veteran who believed his great-grandfather was one of the gardeners. Even former employees of the William family, some with guilt, some with gratitude, came back to speak. And then, a surprise. One afternoon, a sleek black Lincoln pulled up to the estate gate. A well-dressed man in his 50s stepped out. He wore a dark, tailored coat and carried a briefcase. But his eyes were what drew attention. Sharp, observant, wounded. "I'm Derek Vaughn," he said, shaking Jackson's hand. "My mother was Helen Vaughnch, was Lydia's cousin. She used to babysit for Lydia when she lived up north." Jackson blinked. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I have letters. Lydia sent my mother copies of her originals. She knew someone might intercept them." The room fell into a hush as Derek opened the case and laid out the letters. These weren't like the ones found in the box. These were raw, angry, defiant. "They say silence is protection, but it's a cage. I won't raise Ella in a cage. I'll teach her to shout. James, if you still believe in the William name, you must burn it and start again. Names mean nothing without honor." These weren't just the words of a grieving woman. They were the cries of a prophetess. Later that night, Jackson sat by the fireplace again, Elias beside him. They were both exhausted, overwhelmed, but deeply alive. "I thought my family had it all figured out," Jackson murmured. "Turns out, we were just the last ones to admit we were lost." Elias chuckled dryly. "That's the start of every real journey, brother." Outside, Maya and Edith walked along the front path where they had planted a row of small oak trees. One for Thomas, one for Lydia, one for Ella. "Do you think trees remember?" Maya asked. Edith looked at her. "I think they carry things, just like we do, and if we're lucky, they pass it on." As the chapter of secrets began to close, a new one opened on where truth no longer had to sneak through cracks in the wall. It could stand in the sunlight, tall and proud, with names etched in stone. By the end of that week, the estate welcomed its first group of school children from Savannah. They were quiet at first, fidgety, as all children are. But when Maya stood up in front of the portrait of the founding William patriarch and began telling the real story, not the curated one, but the layered, painful, beautiful truth, they listened. And then one boy raised his hand. "Why didn't anyone tell us this before?" Maya took a breath. "Because some stories take a long time to be heard, and some voices need a small girl to whisper first." The boy nodded, wide-eyed. That night, as twilight settled over the estate and the leaves rustled like parchment, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt alive. The air that morning was different still, but heavy with meaning. There was no rain, no bird song, just the distant sound of wind pressing against the window panes. Inside the William estate's great hall, final preparations for the dedication ceremony were underway. Chairs had been arranged in careful rows beneath the grand chandelier, and beneath them, a freshly laid slab of polished marble reflected the names etched by hand: Lydia Maddox, Thomas Maddox, Ella Maddox. Dozens more. Each one a story. A silence broken. Jackson Williams stood at the far end of the hall, staring at the wall. His reflection mingled with the names behind the glass. He wore a dark suit and a red Teehee's father's tie, the one he used to wear during corporate takeovers. But today was no conquest. Today was a surrender, of ego, of legacy, of lies. Elias walked in from the side door, his hands stained from the soil out back. He had just planted the last of the memory oaks, and the dirt still clung to his fingernails. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Jackson didn't turn. "Number. But it's not about me being ready. It's about it being time." Elias nodded. "Then let's give them the time they were never granted." Outside, people were gathering. Not just family and friends, but reporters, historians, neighbors black, white, young, old. A retired librarian from Macon brought a hand-stitched quilt she said had once belonged to her aunt, who worked as a cook on the estate. A woman in a military uniform saluted the name of her grandfather, listed under Grounds Crew Supervisor, 1,942, 1,945, and the children, dozens of them from the local school, stood with handmade signs that read, "We hear you now." Maya William held one of the programs in her small hands. She had insisted on printing them herself, and each one included a short poem she had written. "They tried to hide your name in wood. They buried it beneath the floor. But truth has roots too thick to die, and now we build you a front door." Her words would open the ceremony. When the clock struck 11, Edith stepped up to the podium. Dressed in a deep blue suit with a pearl brooch pinned to her lapel, she looked every bit the guardian of truth she had become. Her voice was strong. "We gather not to rewrite history, but to reread it properly. For too long, the story of this land has been told from a single chair at a long table. Today, we set that table again and every voice has a seat." The crowd hushed. Then Maya walked up. The microphone came nearly to her forehead. She didn't need it. Her voice was clear. "My name is Maya William. I live here now, but someone else used to live here too. Her name was Lydia. She was my great-aunt. She loved a man who was kind. He worked hard. His name was Thomas. And they had a little girl named Ella, like me. No one talked about them until we listened to the walls." She turned and pointed to the great oil painting behind her. "And this man, he founded the William family. But his story wasn't the only one that mattered. Now, we tell everyone's story." Applause. Not the kind that burst loudly, but the kind that built slowly, rising like morning light. After the speeches, Jackson took the podium. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the gravity of what had brought him here. "I was born into wealth, privilege, and a story that always made me the hero. But I wasn't. I was just the last character added to a book written in invisible ink. Today, that ink becomes visible." He paused, lifting a weathered leather notebook. "This was my grandfather's. In it I found records of names, decisions, punishments, all done in the name of order. But now, I offer it as evidence that the past is not buried. It's just waiting." He stepped down, walked over to the wall of names, and placed the notebook on a small podium beside it. Then, in an unscripted gesture, he knelt. Not as a show, not for the cameras, but because some stories demand we lower ourselves before we can rise. The crowd stood in silence. Suddenly, from the back of the room, a man's voice called out, "That's my father's name." Heads turned. An elderly black man in a gray vest stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "Samuel Henry Maddox. That's my father. You found him." Elias moved quickly and embraced the man. "Welcome home, brother." After the ceremony, guests wandered the grounds. Some sat quietly near the oak trees. Others read the stories printed beneath each photograph in the gallery room. A few wept. Most just breathed deeply, as though the air itself had been waiting to change. Inside the study, Evelyn Maddox stood beside the old fireplace, staring at the mirror that had once hidden the secret door. Her fingers traced the frame, remembering. Jackson joined her. "I remember when I first walked in here," he said. "This place felt cold, like something was watching." She nodded. "It wasn't watching, it was waiting." He looked at her. "Evelyn, I need to ask, why did you come back? After all these years?" She smiled sadly. "Because silence eats memory, and I wasn't going to let my family be forgotten again." He placed a hand on her shoulder. We won't forget. Not anymore. As dusk began to fall, Maya returned to the portrait. She looked up at it one last time. Then, as if answering a silent call, she walked toward the mirror. The secret door had been sealed now, a plaque in its place. But Maya knelt and whispered something against the wood. I kept my promise, Aunt Lydia. In the kitchen, Edith stirred a pot of gumbo. The aroma filled the air-smoked sausage, okra, bay leaf. Guests were invited to eat, to share stories, to stay. Elias passed out bowls while Jackson poured sweet tea with lemon, just like Lydia used to make. At one point, Samir turned to Jackson. You know, he said, we could publish this. Not just the records, but the story, the whole thing. Jackson nodded slowly. Let's do it. But not as a William memoir, as a Maddox testimony. That night, as the estate settled under moonlight, music played from an old phonograph in the living room. Something soft, jazz, maybe, from another time. Maya danced barefoot with Edith, her giggles echoing through the hall. And somewhere deep in the walls, no longer hidden, no longer feared, the house exhaled. 2 days after the ceremony, the William estate no longer felt like just a house. It breathed with new purpose. The gallery halls now had visitors nearly every hour, locals, teachers, Vietnam veterans, even tourists from Savannah and Atlanta who had read about it in the Tribune. The marble wall of names had become more than a tribute, it was a magnet for stories, each name drawing out forgotten voices like ghosts finally being acknowledged. But beneath all the healing, another current stirred. Maya sat at the grand dining table, crayons scattered around her as she worked on a thank you card for Evelyn. Her little hand moved carefully across the paper, drawing a sunflower and a small key. Jackson watched from the hallway, holding a fresh cup of coffee, his face caught somewhere between awe and worry. She's different, he said softly to Edith, who had come up behind him with a folded blanket. Edith leaned against the doorframe. She's always been different, but now you're finally seeing it. He nodded. I just keep thinking about how she knew about the door, the mirror, the whispers. She sensed it all. Edith looked at him. Children like Maya? They don't guess. They remember. Downstairs, Elias was in the study, going through a shipment of old documents that had just arrived from the Historical Commission. Among the files were scanned photographs, church records, letters from sharecroppers. But one envelope, yellowed and sealed with wax, stood out. It bore no return address, just one word in cursive ink: redemption. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single page. No greeting, no signature. Only, the floor beneath the staircase still sings, and the stone that was never turned hides the breath of the dead. His hands went cold. He turned the page over blank. Immediately, he stood and walked up to the main hall where the central staircase spiraled upward like a ribcage. He tapped his knuckles along each tread. Nothing. Then, halfway up, he pressed his ear to the wood. A faint hum, mechanical, rhythmic, not natural, not from age. He called out, Jackson, you need to see this. Moments later, Jackson, Edith, and Maya stood beside Elias as he pointed at the 8th step from the base. This one, Elias said. There's something under it. They brought in tools and gently pried up the step. Beneath it lay a hidden cavity lined with tin and wires. Inside, a small metal box sat nestled in dust. Jackson opened it slowly, revealing a spool of magnetic audio tape, wrapped in paper marked 1959, Night of the Burn. Ugh. Maya tilted her head. That's the fire Grandpa said never happened. Jackson's face tightened, because the family said it was a lightning strike. But maybe it wasn't. They took the tape to Samir, who had stayed behind to help archive. Using old equipment from the local college, he threaded the tape and began playback. The sound crackled, hissed, then voices came through, panicked, overlapping. They're locking them in. Tell Mr. William we can't stop it, not now. Get the ledger, burn it first. She's in the pantry. They don't know Lydia's still inside. The room went silent. Samir paused the tape. My God, he whispered. They tried to erase it literally. Edith sat down slowly. That fire, it wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. Jackson buried his face in his hands. Lydia, they locked her in. Maya's small voice cut through the grief. But she got out. Somehow. Edith turned to her. Why do you think that? Maya hesitated, then said, because she hid the journal. She whispered to me about it. She said the truth always finds air. In the following days, the estate became the focus of renewed media attention. The discovery of the audio tape was explosive. The Tribune ran the headline, William family fire was arson, not accident tapes reveal, cover up. National reporters followed. For some, it was just another scandal. For others, it was validation of long-whispered suspicions. A few members of the extended William family protested. One cousin accused Jackson of desecrating legacy. Another sent legal threats. But Jackson stood firm. He appeared on national radio, his voice steady and clear. Our legacy doesn't begin with lies. It begins with truth. And if that truth is painful, then so be it. We are not here to preserve comfort. We are here to honor the cost. Edith, too, gave an interview to a prominent podcast. This isn't about guilt. It's about courage. About listening to walls and mirrors and children like Maya. If we don't speak for the dead, we become their jailers. But amid the swelling attention, an unexpected message arrived. It came in the form of a handwritten letter, signed only with the initials J.D. The handwriting was shaky, old. The letter read, "There was another door beneath the south cellar. Lydia knew about it. So did my brother. But we were afraid. Afraid the truth would turn to ash. If you're reading this, perhaps now it can live." They followed the instructions in the letter, descending into the cellar, a place long sealed. Behind an old wine rack, Elias found a false wall. When he removed it, they uncovered a stone tunnel, narrow and damp, leading into the earth. At the end of the tunnel, a wooden crate sat wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were objects untouched by time photographs, letters, a porcelain doll with a broken hand, and a final ledger. This one, unlike the others, was in Lydia's handwriting. She had chronicled everything: names of workers hidden, money diverted to help them escape, threats from within the family, even the night of the fire. The final entry read, "If you're reading this, it means I failed to escape, or perhaps I succeeded in a way they never understood. I wasn't trying to survive. I was trying to be heard." They brought the ledger upstairs, placing it beside the wall of names. A new plaque was added. Lydia Maddox, keeper of memory. 1,921. 1,959. At that moment, Maya walked up to the wall and placed her drawings on flower and key beneath the new plaque. Then she looked at Jackson. "Will you tell the story?" she asked. He nodded. Every word. As the family gathered for dinner that night, no one talked of money, or stocks, or company shares. They talked of Lydia, of Thomas, of Ella, of the bravery it takes to be small and still change the world. Later, as Jackson stood at the window of his office, he saw Edith walking in the garden, Maya skipping beside her. He took out a pen and wrote something in his notebook. The house was never haunted. It was holding its breath. And now, finally, it can exhale. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and whispered, "Thank you, Lydia." The wind outside rustled through the oaks, and somewhere beneath the floorboards, the echoes of silence gave way to peace. The days after the tunnel's discovery unfolded like soft, steady waves, nothing dramatic, but quietly transformative. Jackson found himself waking earlier each morning, as though his soul was finally tuned to something deeper than stock reports or board meetings. The mansion, once filled with silence that weighed heavy, now carried a sense of vigilant peace, like the house had shifted from holding secrets to watching over those who listened. Maya had started spending more time in the garden, not playing, not even drawing, but listening. She would sit on the old stone bench near the magnolia tree and close her eyes. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she didn't. Edith kept a close watch, but she never interrupted. "Why that spot?" Jackson asked her one morning, his coffee steaming in his hand. "She says it's the quietest place in the world," Edith replied. "And that's where Lydia's whispers come the loudest." Jackson looked over at Maya, seated cross-legged under the canopy of flowering white. Her lips moved silently. A part of him feared this wasn't over, that perhaps what they'd uncovered was just one layer, one chamber of a much larger vault. That feeling deepened when Elias approached him that evening with a stack of old blueprints. "I've been going through the original estate schematics. And Jackson, there's something strange. These older blueprints show a sub-basement, but it doesn't appear in any of the renovation documents after 1986. Jackson leaned over the maps. You think there's another hidden room? Elias tapped the plans. I think there's something even deeper than the cellar, maybe another level they intentionally buried. That night, as a summer storm rolled in from the coast, Jackson, Elias, and Samir made their way back to the cellar. Flashlights in hand, they examined the stone walls, tracing their fingers along the cold dampness until Samir paused. There, he whispered. That panel, it's made of different stone. Together, they removed the panel, revealing a narrow stone stairwell spiraling further down. The air grew colder with each step, and the scent shifted older, heavier, untouched. At the bottom, they found it. A single steel door, rusted at the hinges, sealed shut with a chain and a lock older than any they'd seen in the house. Elias stepped forward and tried the key he had found with Lydia's journal. It clicked. When the door opened, the light caught something unexpected. Walls lined with filing cabinets, black metal shelves filled with boxes, and a desk in the corner with a dusty rotary phone. This was an office, Jackson muttered. A records room. They stepped in, brushing off the dust, opening drawer after drawer. Inside were documents stamped confidential, ledgers marked in 2 sets of handwriting, and sealed envelopes addressed to names no one recognized. One file, in particular, stopped Jackson cold. It had his grandfather's name on it, Reginald William, and a document titled Contingency Agreements Project Elmsworth. He read through it, each word cutting deeper than the last. The document outlined a private deal between Reginald and 3 regional industrial heads, agreeing to cover up the deaths of workers in exchange for political favors and land exchanges. Attached was a photograph of a burned structuria wooden dormitory housing black farmhands. A single sentence under the photo read, "Do not let this reach Savannah Tribune." Jackson dropped the paper. He knew. He was part of it. Elias looked pale. These weren't just mistakes. These were decisions. For a long while, no one spoke. Then Maya's voice echoed softly from the top of the stairwell. "Dad?" Jackson turned, heart racing. "Maya, how did you?" "I followed the light. The house told me where you went." He climbed up to meet her. She held something in her Hansa-framed photograph, dusty but intact. It was Lydia, younger, smiling, standing beside a woman no one in the family had ever identified. "She told me to find this," Maya said, her voice certain. She said the woman next to her. She was her sister. She helped hide the workers. Jackson took the photo gently. "We didn't even know Lydia had a sister." Maya nodded, because they made everyone forget her. Back upstairs, Jackson gathered the family and the team. "We have a choice to make," he told them. "We can stop here, with the truth we've found, or we can bring it all out. The names, the letters, the crimes, all of it." Edith stood. "There's no choice. You finish what Lydia started." Over the following week, they digitized every document, cataloged every box, and partnered with a local Black History archive to publish the findings. A press release was prepared, this time not by lawyers or PR consultants, but by Maya. She dictated it slowly to Jackson, who typed every word. This house belonged to people who did wrong, but they also left behind people who did right. You can't separate them, but you can choose which voice to listen to. We choose Lydia's. The press conference was scheduled for a Friday morning. National media had picked up the story again. The Tribune, NPR, even a documentary crew from Netflix requested interviews. As Jackson prepared to speak, he stood before the mirror in Lydia's old bedroom. Not the one behind which the first door had been found, this was her personal mirror, cracked at the corner, its glass fogged with age. He stared at his reflection. "You carry the name, now carry the weight." Downstairs, reporters gathered under the grand chandelier. Maya stood beside Edith, holding a bouquet of fresh magnolias. Samir and Elias stood behind the podium, their shoulders squared, ready to back every word. Jackson stepped up to the microphone. "My name is Jackson William, and for too long, that name was used to bury the truth. Today, we dig it up not to shame, but to heal. This estate is no longer a symbol of legacy. It is a witness, and we are the ones who must testify." He paused. A little girl led us to a door. Behind it were whispers, lies, and loss. But beyond that door was also something else, hope. the kind of hope that speaks even when you try to silence it. There were tears, applause, and one quiet moment when the power flickered slightly just for a second and Maya smiled. "She heard you," she whispered to her father. That night, as the family sat outside under the stars, Jackson looked around, Edith pouring sweet tea, Elias laughing with Samir over something in the newspaper, Maya, asleep on his shoulder, her sunflower drawing folded neatly in her lap. The house no longer loomed in the background. It stood gently, as if watching, as if resting. And for the first time, Jackson believed what Maya had said at the very beginning. The house isn't haunted, it's hurt. Now, it was healing. Autumn came gently to the William estate. The trees began to shed their summer bravado in favor of amber humility, and the air carried that crispness only October could affair a kind of memory in every breath. It was the first fall in years that Jackson didn't dread. Instead of preparing to close up the house for the season, he kept the windows open, the lights on, the doors unlocked. For once, the house felt less like a museum of inherited sins and more like a home willing to forgive. One morning, Maya stood by the oil painting again of the original patriarch, the founder of the William legacy. Her tiny hand reached out as it had that first day. Jackson stood behind her, watching. "She says it's time," Maya whispered. Jackson knelt beside her. "Time for what, sweet girl?" "To paint over him." He smiled softly, unsure if it was a joke. "You mean, the painting?" Maya nodded with solemn certainty. "He had his time, but it's someone else's turn to stand on the wall." Jackson looked up at the thick brushstrokes, the arrogance in the man's chin, the smugness in the angle of his eyes. His ancestors had lived under that stare for generations. "Whose turn do you think it is?" Maya didn't hesitate. "Lydia's." The next week, a local artist, black, middle-aged, from Savannah, arrived at the mansion with her easel and her brushes. Her name was Darlene Cotton, and when she saw the space, she smiled and simply said, "It's about damn time." For 2 days, she worked in silence, Maya watching beside her. On the third day, Jackson joined, then Edith. Then, unexpectedly, so did Mr. Turner from the library in town, and the young barista who had once served Maya hot chocolate during her therapy sessions. Community gathered, as if called by an invisible bell. By the end of the week, Lydia's portrait drawn from a single photo and many whispered descriptions was complete. She stood straight, eyes calm, wearing the faintest smile. Behind her, the outline of a sunflower field, and in the bottom right corner, at Darlene's suggestion, were 3 names: Lydia, Maya, Jackson. That night, a private ceremony was held in the Great Hall. The lights dimmed. Music played Lydia's favorite gospel hymn, rediscovered in one of her cassette tapes. And as the song rose, Maya turned to her father and asked, "Can I say something?" He nodded. Maya stepped up, small but steady. "I used to be scared of this house," she began. "I thought it was too big, too old, too loud in the wrong ways. But now I know, it was just waiting to be listened to." She looked at Lydia's portrait. She waited a long time for someone to open that door. And we did. Not just me. All of us. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "Now it's our job to keep listening. To every whisper, every truth, even the ones that hurt." There was silence. Not empty, but full. And then the applause came. Soft at first, then swelling. It wasn't for the speech. It was for the change. For the courage to let a little girl lead. For a house that had finally told its whole story. In the weeks that followed, the William estate was transformed. The basement archives were converted into a small museum, open to the public every Saturday. School groups visited. Survivors came forward. Historians wrote essays. A podcast series launched titled The Door Behind the Mirror, hosted by a voice actor narrating Lydia's journal. Jackson worked closely with community leaders to set up a scholarship fund in Lydia's name for young girls of color interested in history, storytelling, or community advocacy. Maya helped design the brochure, drawing tiny sunflowers in the corner of every page. One afternoon, as they walked along the river path behind the house, Maya looked up at her father. "You know," she said, "I don't hear her anymore." Jackson paused. "Lydia?" Maya nodded. "She's quiet now." He looked across the slow-moving water. Maybe she finally feels heard. Maybe, Maya said. Or maybe she knows we've got it from here. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills and the last light filtered through Lydia's stained glass window in the library, Jackson sat with Edith on the porch. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked, sipping sweet tea. "Not in 100 years, Jackson replied. "But here we are." He nodded, gaze fixed on the road where the mailbox stood. The same road where secrets had been buried, and now truth was blooming. "Do you think the house is proud?" he asked softly. Edith smiled. "The house?" She tilted her head toward the walls. "Oh, honey, the house has always known. We're the ones who had to catch up." As night fell, Maya curled up on the couch, her sketchpad open on her lap. She was drawing again, a new door this time. One she hadn't seen before. One that didn't yet exist. Jackson leaned over her shoulder. "Where does that one go?" She shrugged. "Don't know yet. But maybe one day, someone else will open it." He kissed her hair and whispered, "Then let's make sure they're not afraid." The wind stirred the curtains. Somewhere in the walls, a beam creaked, not in warning, but like an old voice clearing its throat after a long rest. And in that sound, in that house, in that moment, there was no more fear. Only legacy, and the quiet, powerful echo of justice finally coming home.